Alright, we are now on chapter 14, on page 159, Trembling on the Trail. The adventure of the day tormented Tom's dreams that night, so it was in his dreams all night. Even his waking hours were filled with fantasies of the thousands of dollars he and Huck had seen. It was more money than either boy had ever believed possible. If they could only figure out what Injun Joe had meant by number 2 under the cross, the money would be theirs. The next afternoon, Huck and Tom met down by the river to plan their set strategy. "Huck, I've been thinking," began Tom. "I think that number 2 might be the number of a room in a tavern." Huck immediately agreed. This idea sounded reasonable, and since there were only 2 taverns in town, he decided to find out which one had a room called number 2. So a tavern, this was back in the 1800s and probably early 1900s. A tavern is where people would go to drink. But it was also kind of like a hotel. You could stay there. They only had a few rooms, but they had rooms upstairs and a bar down below, so that was a tavern. Within an hour, Huck had returned with some information. The smaller tavern had a room which was kept locked at all times. Huck was sure that this was the number 2 Injun Joe had mentioned in the haunted house. The boys agreed to stake out the tavern. So stake out means watch it. They would just sit outside and watch to see if Injun Joe came or anything. They met that night and hid in the alley by the tavern door. No one resembling Injun Joe or his partner entered or left. After several hours, the boys gave up and agreed to return again the next night. The following evening, so the next evening, at the same hour, they resumed their watch. This time, Huck stood guard, so he was the one watching everything, while Tom ventured closer to the tavern and to the locked room. So Huck was making sure nothing happened while Tom was going closer to the tavern. Huck waited in silence for what seemed like hours. Maybe Tom fainted, he thought. Maybe he has been caught. What if he is dead? Suddenly there was a flash of light, and Tom came tearing by him, shouting, "Run! Run for your life!" Tom didn't need to repeat these words. Huck was practically flying after him. When the 2 boys reached the abandoned barn at the edge of the village, they relaxed. As soon as Tom got his breath, he explained, "Huck, it was awful. I tried 2 of my keys just as soft as I could, but they wouldn't turn. Then I took hold of the doorknob, and the door opened. It wasn't even locked. As I walked in, I almost stepped onto Injun Joe's hand. Oh my gosh. He was lying there, sound asleep on the floor with his arms spread out. So Injun Joe's like this on the floor, asleep. Huck, I didn't wait to look around. I didn't see the box, and I did not see the cross. All I saw was a lot of bottles and Injun Joe stone drunk. So completely drunk. The boys agreed that it was too risky to return to the tavern that night. Instead, Huck promised to watch the place every night, and if Injun Joe or his partner ever left for a while, he would give Tom the signal. The boys said goodnight. Tom returned home, and Huck found a deserted hayloft to sleep in. So a hayloft is where they have hay. So it's in this picture. That night, Tom lay awake thinking of Injun Joe and the treasure, and later dreamed of them too. There was no escape from these thoughts. Wouldn't that be scary if you're trying to sneak in somebody's room and you almost step on their hand? Oh, and this is a murderer, so somebody who wants to probably kill them. And he almost stepped on his hand. It's crazy. Okay, one thing I want to say about Huck, because we don't have a lot of information about Huck yet. But we are learning a little bit more about Huck. And one thing is that he's a really good friend. Okay, we have a lot of evidence. Can you see that? We have a lot of evidence that Huck is a good friend. Like, he kept the secret about Injun Joe. He kept mum. Remember, that's how they say it in this book. So he didn't tell anybody about it. Tom did, but he didn't. He kept his promise to Tom. And then here, Huck promised to watch the place every night. So he decided to stay outside the tavern and watch the tavern every night. And if Injun Joe or his partner ever left for a while, he would give Tom the signal. So he's really a dedicated friend. He's a good friend, right? He's going to do anything for Tom, and he'll, like, he doesn't have to stay and watch the tavern. He's just like, no, I'll do it because we want to figure out where this treasure is. He knows Tom really wants to find the treasure, and he wants to find the treasure. So he's like, yeah, I will put forth the effort, and I will stay at the tavern every night. So he's a good friend. And you can use that quote to support this reason. Because remember, this is the reason, good friend, and then you can find a direct quote, which we just saw on page 164. So you can write this in your notes if you'd like. Huck is a good friend. Okay? And see what other things you can maybe find. What did you learn about Tom during this chapter? Okay?